Good morning. I'm Anthony.
Good morning. This is Jeff, part of Team Zach.
Hello, I'm Christian Villatoro.
Hello, this is Louis Sagarda.
First thing we're going to do is go up and click on the view. Actually, it's the design view, which will bring up a box to save the name of our first table, which will be called the students table data. Once that brings up that first table, you're going to see two columns up there. One is going to be called field name, and the other one is data type. So our first field name is going to be student ID, which will be our primary key, and that data type is number. The next field name is first name, followed by the last name, and both of those are short text data. So, okay, and that really is about all you can do at that point. So what you want to do is go save your work, and then once your work has been saved, it switches over into the design view, which allows you to input the various data for that first table. And so this is a Harry Potter themed access database. So obviously we're going to start out with Harry. And so we'll start out with Harry and then move downward with his friends. And at that point, you just want to watch what you're putting in, making sure you're not making any mistakes. And then as you get to the end, just give it a second look, just to make double certain you don't want to have problems down the road when you get into with your queries. So a little bit of preventive maintenance on this end of the equation. So we're almost done here, and then once we're done with this last name here, we're going to go up into the upper left-hand corner, and let's see here. We're going to click on the little diskette up in the upper left-hand corner, which will save our work. And then we'll click on the Create tab, and then we'll click on the table design, and that will bring up our second table. Now, if you'll notice, at this point, it just says Table 1. We have not named the table just yet. We will name that here shortly. So what we can do is we're in the datasheet view. So we can just go ahead and start setting our categories for our tables. And starting with this is going to be called the classes table. So the first thing under the field name is going to be the classes ID instead of the student ID, which will be our primary key for this table. Now we'll move on down the line from classes ID to course name, section number, term, credit hours, and then we'll set the correct data type for each one of those. Okay, and so we'll do is we'll click on the view, which will prompt a box so that we can name our table. So at this point, we're going to call it what it should be, and it's the classes table data. And at this point, we're back into the datasheet view, which will allow us to input the data instead of the fields for this particular spreadsheet. So at this point, there's not much more to really tell you. Essentially, we're doing the same thing we did as in section 1, in table 1, as far as, creating a table, naming the table, setting the columns. Once we get the columns, then we go ahead and start putting in our data. So once we're done with the second table, which starts with aerobics and then goes to computers, and then history, then English, and then government, biology, and last but not least, chemistry. Then what we'll do is we'll go up in the upper left-hand corner, and we will save our work. And then once we're done with that, we'll go over and click on the Create tab, and what's it called? The table design to start working on our third table.
After creating tables, we're going to want to create a relationship between these tables. The student and class table will be our bridge and be connecting both of the other tables. We want to collect our class ID, which is a primary key to the other class ID. We want to enforce the integrity between these. By enforcing the integrity, it basically says that these rules must always be followed. As we can see, we now have a enforced relationship 1 through infinity on both tabs. This should help the relationship overall. In query number 1, we just want to create a simple table from the data of from the other tables. We just want to get the last name of Harry. We want to get what class name he's going to be taking, the credit hours of this class, and then we also want to get hours studied for this class. By doing that in the wizard, it automatically gives us this information. However, we do have to change a little bit. We have to add a criteria which would filter the table to our Potter. As we can see, this fixes our graph. Question number 2 prompts us to create a new query. You can either use the query wizard or the query design. In this method, we use the query wizard. We want to get Potter's name, his last name. We want to get his course name, credit hours, hours studied, and required study time. Later, we will introduce required study time, which is a little different because it requires an expression. Credit hours times 2. So you should be spending twice the hours studying than the credit hours of the class. Once we insert all this data, we want to go to the view section. We see that the criteria will continue to be Potter. We're going to run this to verify that everything is working properly. Now we're going to want to add an expression. We're going to name this expression required study time. As you can see here, we're inserting required study time. After this, we're going to make sure that we insert the expression as a total. That way we get the correct information. Now we're going to want to save this as Potter's required study time. That way we know that this is where we should go for this information.
Alright, so as you can see here for the students query for question number 3, I actually had made a mistake and I had to start over. So after correcting my mistakes, I had to look it over again to make sure I had the last name for the field, a course name, credit hours, and of course the required study time and hours studied, and study time deficiency. So over here, I'm looking for the missing groups, which I had to go back and correct that. Because I didn't want to miss any information. So whatever information that you don't put in there, you will be missing later on as you go along. So make sure you have all the fields correct and all the info in neat and organized order. And for the fields, to find the required study time, of course, you have to find the equation for the database in order to get the correct info. And make sure it's formatted correctly, because Access sometimes will not find the info or actually calculate the info like you think it will. Sometimes you have to put expressions or formulas into the database manually. Because to get the correct query, you also have to put the right info in it. You know, like the old saying, you put garbage in, you get garbage out. So you have to make sure you get everything correct. For the time deficiency, it's the same thing. For the last field, make sure you put the expression in there. And make sure it's all formatted correctly. Because you do not want to have the wrong type of info. Alright, so remember, you're trying to find the credit hours, you're multiplying it by 2, and then you're also subtracting the hours studied to get the study time deficiency. And this is only for one student. This student being Harry Potter. We're still going by that Harry Potter theme at the moment. And also for the total, you gotta make sure you pick the right option, it being group by for number 3. And after you put all the info in, of course you have to, you're gonna want to rename the query, make sure everything's correct in there, and rename the query to make sure you label it correctly. And of course you make a new query for number 4. This is for question number 4. This is the last one. And for number 4, there's actually a mistake I made. There's actually another way of putting it in there. And I'll show you in a second. Alright, so for question number 4, you're going to look for last name, sum of credit hours, sum of required study time, the sum of hours studied, and the sum of hours, or the sum of study time deficiency. Those are the actual things we're looking for after we've already solved the first 3 questions. So for question number 4, to get all the sums for everything else, instead of looking for tables to set up in a relationship, what we can also do is actually use the queries and set a relationship up between them. This will make things a lot easier instead of having to put the equations all over again, and thus killing more time. So what you want to do is set up a relationship between the queries or the query. You can just pick the Potter study time deficiency query, set it up like that, and that's all you have to do to set up the sum of credit hours. That way you can just go to the total, and instead of putting group by, you put sum under the total. By putting sum under each field, it is going to show you, or it's going to add everything together, giving you one clean and neat table.